Hello, welcome back to This Week in History. I'm your host, Bradley Smith, and this is the final episode of This Week in History we have for you guys. So we have a very special, really long episode for you guys, where we will be covering topics from May 11th all the way to June 2nd. I won't waste any more of your time. Let's get into it. Starting things off on May 11th, 1998, India conducted 3 underground nuclear tests in the Pokhran Desert. This event, known as Operation Shakti, established India as a nuclear power and significantly altered the geopolitical landscape of South Asia. Now we move on to May 12th. On May 12th, 1937, following the abdication of his brother Edward VIII, George VI was crowned at Westminster Abbey. His daughter, the future Queen Elizabeth II, watched the ceremony, which was the first coronation to be filmed and broadcasted on radio. We now move on to April 13th. On May 13th, 1846, following the border skirmish in Texas, the United States officially declared war on the Federal Republic of Mexico. This conflict ultimately resulted in the United States acquiring territory that would become California, Nevada, Utah, and parts of several other states. We now move on to May 14th. On May 14th, 1607, a group of roughly 100 English settlers arrived at Jamestown, Virginia, establishing the first permanent English settlement in North America. We now move on to May 15th. On May 15th, 1536, the second wife of King Henry VIII, Anne Boleyn, stood trial for treason, adultery, and incest. She was found guilty by a jury of peers, including her own uncle and ex-fiancé, and sentenced to death, a pivotal moment in the English Reformation. We now move on to May 16th. On May 16th, 1966, the Chinese Communist Party issued the May 16th notification, signaling the start of a cultural revolution initiated by Mao Zedong. This decade-long campaign aimed to preserve true communist ideology by purging capitalist and traditional elements of the Chinese society. Now move on to May 17th. On May 17th, 1954, in a unanimous 9-0 decision, the United States Supreme Court ruled that racial segregation in public schools was unconstitutional. The ruling declared that separate education facilities are inherently unequal, effectively overturning the separate but equal doctrine established by Plessy v. Ferguson in 1896. Now move on to May 18th. On May 18th, 1652, Rhode Island passed the first law in English-speaking North America making slavery illegal. While enforcement remained a challenge for decades, this was a landmark moral and legal stance in the colonial era. We now move on to May 19th. On May 19th, 1956, the second wife of King Henry VIII, Anne Boleyn, was beheaded at the Tower of London on charges of adultery, incest, and treason. Her death cleared the way for Henry to marry his third wife, Jane Seymour, just 11 days later. Now we move on to May 20th. On May 20th, 1902, Cuba officially gained independence from the United States, which had occupied the island following the Spanish-American War. Thomas Estrada Palma was sworn in as the nation's first president. We now move on to May 21st. On May 21st, 1927, Charles Lindbergh landed the Spirit of St. Louis at Le Bourget Field in Paris, becoming the first person to fly solo and nonstop across the Atlantic Ocean. He was met by a crowd of 150,000 people and became an instant global icon. Now move on to May 22nd. On May 22nd, 1455, the first battle of the War of the Roses, the first battle of St. Albans, took place. Richard, Duke of York, defeated the forces of King Henry VI, beginning a decade-long struggle for the English throne between the houses of York and Lancaster. We now move on to May 23rd. On May 23rd, 1430, during the 100 Years' War, the Maid of Orleans, Joan of Arc, was captured by the Burgundies at the Siege of Compiègne. They later sold her to the English, leading to her trial and execution. Now we move on to May 24th. On May 24th, 1819, born at Kingston Palace, Victoria would go on to rule the British Empire for 63 years. Her reign, the Victorian era, was a period of immense industrial, political, and military change. We now move on to May 25th. On May 25th, 1787, after a delay due to poor weather, a quorum of delegates finally gathered at Pennsylvania State House in Philadelphia. With George Washington elected as president of the convention, they began the task of drafting the United States Constitution. We now move on to May 26th. On May 26th of 1940, due to World War II, or during World War II, Operation Dynamo was launched to evacuate Allied powers from the beaches at Dunkirk. Over the next 9 days, a fleet of naval vessels and hundreds of civilian little ships rescued more than 338,000 troops who were surrounded by German forces. We now move on to May 27th. On May 27th, 1941, during World War II, the British Royal Navy finally caught and sank the German battleship Bismarck in the North Atlantic. This victory was a critical victory for the Allies, as the Bismarck had previously sunk the HMS Hood and posed a massive threat to Atlantic convoys. We now move on to May 28th. On May 28th, 1918, following the collapse of the Russian Empire and the defeat of the Ottoman Empire in World War I, Armenia declared its independence, establishing the first modern Armenian state. We now move on to May 29th. On May 29th, 1917, the 35th President of the United States, John F. Kennedy, was born in Brookline, Massachusetts. His presidency, though cut short, was defined by the space race, the Cuban Missile Crisis, and the Civil Rights Movement. We now move on to May 30th. On May 30th, 1431, after being captured and sold to the English, the 19-year-old Joan of Arc was burned at the stake for heresy in Rouen, France. She was posthumously declared innocent 25 years later and eventually canonized as a saint. We now move on to May 31st. On May 31st, 1910, exactly 8 years after the end of the Boer War, the British colonials of Cape Colony, Natal, Transvaal, and Orange River Colony united to form the Union of South Africa, a dominion of the British Empire. Now move on to June 1st. On June 1st, 1794, the first and largest naval fleet action of the French Revolutionary Wars took place between the British and French navies. While both sides claimed victory, the British successfully prevented a French grain convoy from reaching port. And finally, June 2nd, on June 2nd, 1924, President Calvin Coolidge signed this landmark act into law, which granted full U.S. citizenship to all Native Americans born within the territorial limits of the United States. And I hope you guys enjoyed the series. I sure have. And keep studying history. I will see you guys soon, hopefully, as a high school history teacher. But until then, I will see you guys next time, and God bless America.